Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Hello, and happy 2020 to you. Quick announcement before we dive into the show today is that this is your last chance to jump into Level Up Your Life, my healthy habits course that starts January 21st. There are just a couple of spots left, and if you want them, this is the week to act. This is my community where we actually do the things that we've been meaning to do to embody self-respect for real. So things like meditating, getting enough sleep, exercising, upgrading our diet on our own terms, and making time for what's most important to us. This group changes lives, and this may be the last time that I'm offering it for quite some time. So head to brodywelch.com, go to the Level Up page, and hop on a call with me like today. Anyway, for today, I am getting back to my roots with this show a bit of really helping to bring you behind the curtain on how Chinese medicine looks at a lot of the things that we face in our lives as contemporary humans, specifically stress and difficulty sleeping, difficulty winding down, and how Chinese medicine looks at that. Joining me today for this Chinese herbal geek out on stress and sleep is fellow acupuncturist and Chinese herbalist Stacey Donelson. Stacey and I share an alma mater of Southwest Acupuncture College, but she went to the Boulder campus while I attended in Albuquerque. She is currently pursuing a doctorate at Pacific College of Oriental Medicine in San Diego, California. She is the creator and founder of Good Life Botanicals, which creates unique topicals using wildcrafted organic Chinese herbs and whole plant hemp extract. She and her husband lived in Longmont, Colorado with their 2 kids, where they own and run their own Chinese medicine clinic, Good Life Acupuncture and Wellness Center, as well as Good Life Botanicals. Stacey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for the invitation, Brody. I am totally, thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful.
I'm really grateful to get a chance to talk to you. Like half the point of having this show is getting to talk to cool people who are doing really interesting things in the world about what they're most passionate about. So for you, what are you most passionate about these days with respect to the work that you're doing?
I think it's what I've always been passionate about, which is funny because it's in our name. Mm-hmm. And I actually had a patient who, our name came from a patient. When I first started out on my own, I had a contest and my patients helped name my clinic. They named it Good Life because that's what I do is I help people live the good life. And for me, that's all encompassing. So I think as Americans, we tend to strive to be the best and the most, and we tend to have like all of these superlatives in our life.
First and fastest and
yes.
Yeah, most impressive and most special. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, good is good. And so kind of like just having balance. And so do that in everything that I do, whether it's in the clinic working with my patients, or if it's in the lab, figuring out another topical recipe, or if it's with my family, it's like this balance between fulfilling what your soul destiny is and living this good life. And so that's kind of what I'm passionate about.
What a great name. I mean, I really appreciate the fact that you're distinguishing it from best life, because it's like that it's striving for some sort of ideal. You almost miss the good that you have in life and just deciding like, okay, I'm going to shoot for good and appreciate that good. Seems like a winning recipe.
Well, and I think at least among my patients, I see so many of us out of balance because of that striving.
Oh, do we see the same patients? Yeah. Tell me more.
And so it's like, that's what I'm here to do, is to remind them to connect into themselves, into their purpose, maybe help them rekindle their passion for why they're here, and then help them remember what's good and how to like connect and recognize and just acknowledge that rather than looking for the next thing.
Great. Is there a particular favorite way that you do that with patients?
Oh, wow. So there's just like a lot of different ways I do that. I do a lot of just listening and asking. I ask, yeah, that's an interesting question.
I think it's like the reason behind the question, I think it's because for people who might not have ever had acupuncture or have seen someone for Chinese medicine, they might not necessarily understand what an amazing framework we have to help them kind of look in the mirror and assess what's going on and to make those connections between how they're living and how they're feeling.
Yeah, and I think you're just reminding me that I've been doing this long enough that I forget how unusual our medicine is, at least for this culture. So it's in our questioning. Oftentimes in the first meeting, when we go through the kind of like the questions that we're trained to ask to suss out the patterns, I often discover like that's what I'm doing is I'm not only discovering like what's either the root of like if they're coming in for sleep or if they're coming in for pain or stress. I'm trying to figure out the root of where that is. And the body is kind of like showing me the traffic lights and stoplights and the lights of where to point to. And then the conversation with them helps kind of suss all that out.
And so you make mention of the patterns that we use to figure out how to help someone best, and that's I think one of the reasons that Chinese medicine is so special is that it's not like what are the herbs for stress or like what are the points to use for sleep, because while there certainly are those, that we treat people, not conditions. And so we're always looking at the individual's pattern of imbalance that the person's experiencing so that we can treat the root of it as well as the branch, the reason that they got there. And I'm curious, what are some of the main patterns if we want to do a little nerding out with Chinese medicine and kind of let people come along for the ride as to how we might be seeing them? I'd like to think about the people who are showing up because they are stressed, maybe overwhelmed, exhausted, and can't sleep. Let's unpack a couple of the patterns that we might be thinking about and how you deal with them. So first off, like, I mean, we could just go with straight up liver qi stagnation to start with. And so, yeah, I'll let you take a stab at that.
Get on that. Yeah. So that's probably the most common diagnosis and pattern differentiation that I think all American acupuncturists see. And I love this one because within our own profession, there's such a love-hate relationship with this diagnosis because it's used so often that people sometimes, I think, feel like they're being oversimplistic when they diagnose it. But I also find that when you look at the metaphor of the medicine, like liver qi stagnation, in my opinion, basically is that person who is just on the verge of overwhelm, and they're not able to really express the emotions that they're feeling on a daily basis. They're not able to put voice to their frustrations, their concerns, their joys, their worries, and they're in this kind of like the hamster wheel, like just moving, but not really going anywhere. And they can feel that both like it physically in their body and energetically and emotionally within themselves. And that is a particular form of just frustration and stagnation and just you're going somewhere but nowhere at the same time.
I love that metaphor because like that really does speak to kind of like a car that is, revving its engine, but not like stuck in the mud and isn't able to actually go anywhere. And that people like revving harder isn't necessarily the answer, because then you couldn't just be like stagnating can create its own intractable rut.
Well, and that's where like we get all those side symptoms, right? Like the heat and, like liver qi harassing the heart or liver qi stagnation creating yin deficiency. That's where we start to get all of secondary patterns.
And before we get into secondary patterns, just to fill this out for people a little bit, that some of the classic signs of liver qi stagnating are, that things that can show up in lots of different ways, but like the tight neck and shoulders. It could be the shallow breathing because of a tight diaphragm. So you're finding yourself sighing, or, or pain underneath the rib cage can show up as pain with the period. It can show up as irritable bowel syndrome if it's, affecting the digestion. It can show up as irritability and short temperedness, and that because the liver governs timing and the free flow of energy in the body. So really, anytime the energy isn't flowing freely, we could consider that a stagnation, and that typically what we want to do is unstagnate the chi. And of course, it is difficult to kind of like, it's not a one and done because people are still living their lives. And so a lot of times it is in terms of like, we can do things that can make them feel good and send them home feeling deeply relaxed. But unless they're willing to look at how they're living their lives, it may not stay that way.
Right. And one of the other common symptoms of liver qi stagnation is this classic sleep pattern, right? Where you wake up between 1 and 3 and the monkey brain starts in, and you're laying there in bed thinking about all the things you haven't done, you want to do, all of the worries, and you can't turn off the brain, which then just sets you more into this perpetual rut of all those other symptoms, right? So that's like one of those symptoms that's really easy for, I find, for me to help remedy.
Absolutely. And that corresponds with this idea that the liver has a period where it's especially active in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
And so that waking up around 2 a.m, especially, seems to be, it's very common, whether or not the mind is active, but sometimes with the tossing and turning and that inability to get the mind to quiet down. And you've done, as we were talking before the show, you were telling me about going to UC Berkeley for a class on sleep, and like noticing some cool overlap between what the research is saying over on the Western side of things and how we think about it.
Yeah, my favorite thing from that class was that there's two things. One, most of Americans' issue with sleep is their perception of sleep and not the reality of sleep, which I thought was really fascinating. That American culture, we think that we're supposed to sleep like 10 hours of dead sleep, no moving, no dreaming, no nothing. And that's actually not how adult humans sleep. And so a lot of her class was on just reframing the frame around what to expect during sleep.
So what should we expect during sleep?
So you're supposed to fall asleep. It's supposed to take you between 10 minutes to half an hour to fall asleep. And so if you're falling asleep the minute your head hits the pillow, that's a sign of exhaustion. Like, you're supposed to kind of lay there for a few minutes before you fall asleep. And then when you fall asleep, the first, the most important, that's when you actually go into the deepest levels of sleep, and it's where the profound healing happens, and that's the most important part of the night. So if you're at least getting those first 3 hours, you can function. You're not going to function great, but you're at least functioning. And then after those first 3 hours, then is when you go into the upper levels of sleep. And that's memory allocation and your brain going through and figuring out what's important to keep and what's not. And that's the REM sleep. And that's when we get into the dreams. And most of us wake about 20 to 30 times during the night, but we only remember like 4 to 5 of them. And that's normal. And coming up out of that, oftentimes what happens is people will wake up and then they'll panic because they're awake. And that panic is actually what keeps them awake, rather than waking up and being like, oh, I just woke up.
I have so been there on the panicked end of things. Like, oh no, I'm so screwed. I have so much to do tomorrow and I need to get sleep. And it's really easy to get into fear.
Yeah. And so it was just interesting because I was the only acupuncturist in the room. Everybody else, psychiatrists and MDs. And so she was really walking them through like not to prescribe sleep meds, because she'd actually like done a lot of research on how sleep meds actually mess up sleep. And so she was really walking them through on how to kind of like reframe. And the other big thing she was talking about was dehydration. Like, a lot of people wake up between 1 and 3 a.m. because biologically that's when the liver is doing most of its processing for your blood. And if you're dehydrated, you'll wake up to get water. And so she was like, a really simple thing to see is to have people drink enough water during the day for 3 days. And I've done this several times. And for the state of Colorado, she said that she recommended that regardless of weight, we should all be drinking like 100 ounces of water a day because of how dry it is here. which the whole room gasped, like, you know. But, and even just trying to get close to that, I've found like 80% of my patients who are insomniacs, who wake up every night between 1 and 3, resolve without me ever even having to put a needle in them, just by drinking water.
That's awesome to know. And of course, I live in Oregon where it is damp most of the year. And sometimes people are resistant to drinking water because they have what we call a pathological damp condition going on. And so, because it's kind of like, for those listening who may not know this terminology, dampness is like turbidity in the body. It's like excess fog it's heavy, it's sticky, it is cloudy. The body doesn't know what to do with it, but it's not very useful to us, like the stagnant pond instead of the flowing river. And so sometimes like we might have, especially this time of year, in the winter, like people don't want to like drink water because they'll feel cold and because there's even I've heard this from people, like the water is sitting there on the desk, but they're not drinking it because there's something in them that feels like it can't handle more water. So sometimes it may be that we need to resolve another pattern of dampness first before that water seems appealing. But yes, so critical to us being able to sleep through the night, in addition to so many other functions that it helps with. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. So this person with liver qi stagnation might be freaking out that he or she can't sleep because there's so much going on in life that having that downtime for the mind can be really stressful. And so that's one of those reasons that I believe anybody with liver qi stagnation could benefit from a form of mindfulness or meditation that allows them to be comfortable with that.
I do that a lot in my sessions, actually. When you were asking me how I walk people through this, one of my certifications is in hypnosis. And so I do a lot of teaching people how to create like a guided visualization so that they can relax and like calm their own body down. And I'll walk them through something very simple that they can then do at home on their own, along with breathing. There's a fabulous Qigong breathing technique called the Huff and we've nicknamed it the Huff and Puff. I'm sure there's some sort of fancy Chinese name for it. But it's basically just a full inhale and then a sigh exhale. And doing that along with the guided visualization just helps reset the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system and tones your vagus nerve and really can help rewire that chronic fight or freeze that people are in and help them reset themselves.
So simple and so profound, right? Just breathing
Yeah.
and drinking water.
It's sometimes I think, because we tend to really geek out in Chinese medicine, sometimes I think we tend to make it way more complicated than it needs to be. And sometimes it's warranted. Like oftentimes, like if those are kind of like my 3 go-to things, and that resolves like 85% of the cases that come in. And then remaining 15%, then we have to get into Chinese herbs and I have to do a more detailed differential. And that's where we get into those different secondary patterns that we mentioned. And then all the herbal formulas that go along with those 2, liver qi and patterns.
Yes. Well, let's get into that because I know some people are probably thinking, okay, well, I'm maybe like they're already on the hydration thing. Maybe they're already doing some form of breathing exercise that takes them into parasympathetic. And yet there is more that we can do for them as Chinese medicine practitioners. Of course, there is our classic Xiaoyao Wan or Xiaoyao San, the free and easy wanderer or a rambling powder as it translates. So the idea that the liver is supposed to be this wandering sage that like come what may, you just keep your even free flow of energy through the body. And that is an especially good one I like for women because it has some blood builders in it. And so if you're menstruating, it's helpful to have support for the blood also that contains the consciousness and it gives it a place to land at night. And so that's sort of our classic most simple, probably most like, again, where you have like your snobbier practitioners perhaps like poo-pooing something as simple as Xiaoyuan, but yet it's like, it's popular for a reason. It
Yeah.
really works.
And That's another one of I love that formula. And it's kind of like I have this series, I have like this stepping that I go through. And I'll try, like with the patterns, especially if the pattern's really complicated, because sometimes they're just really complicated. And Xiaoyawan plus all the other one is a good first step. It's not going to mess anything up really, but it's going to help figure out like, oh, do we need to clear more phlegm, more of that dampness that you were talking about, more like is that more of the issue why they can't settle? Or is there more yin deficiency? And is there more heat? And do we need to help in? And is that why they're not being able? So I like Xiaoyasan because it can help kind of stabilize things and then show where still some of the holes are.
And so let's go to yin deficiency, because I know we have, well, that's certainly one of the more common patterns I see in clinic, where people have difficulty staying cool, difficulty staying calm, difficulty staying asleep all night. Maybe they get to sleep fine, but they find themselves waking up, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes waking up with something like a hot flash, or just feeling hot, or like waking up to kick the covers off. And so, what do you like to do for those people?
Well, here's what I have found lately in the last few years in clinic. I have found, for me anyway, that a truly yin deficient patient is actually really rare. What I have
Mhm.
found for me is that it's often damp, it's often phlegm, and the phlegm and the dampness is what's obstructing the yin. And so if I clear the phlegm and the dampness, it's like a gut thing, and it's like they tend, most of my patients anyway tend to be like very earth in nature, and so this is just who I attract. And so they tend to be, carrying a little extra weight. They tend to worry a lot. They tend to have high stress, high thinking, high brain using jobs. And
Probably also motivated to go for the quick carbs and quick sugar,
mhm,
because they're very caring, and they're putting other people's needs before their own, but they're also they're also brainy and usually
right.
have demanding jobs.
Yeah. And so I found in the past that when I would go the yin tonifying formulas, or like Swanzalren, or just even a plain like Suan Tong or Bajin Tong, I found it worse.
Interesting.
So then if I went to more phlegm clearing or formulas, and the one that I like to use the most right now is actually a custom formula from my friends at Botanical Biohacking. They have a customized kind of like a curing pill that's been changed. A few of the ingredients have been changed to be more appropriate for the American diet.
Is that the microguard?
And my favorite is actually the MicroGuard Plus.
Microguard Plus, yeah.
Plus has
I actually interviewed Andrew Miles for this show. I'm not sure when it will air, or if it already will have aired by the time this conversation happens. But his show, Botanical Biohacking, is super fun.
yeah.
And yeah, that idea that dampness, or this turbidity that can hang out in the body, can actually obstruct the things that might actually be working just fine, but they're not where they need to be. Kind
Right.
of. So how do you differentiate? So, and for people who might be listening who are like, phlegm, what is that? Like, I'm not coughing things up, but phlegm in Chinese medicine also has this invisible aspect,
Mm-hmm.
which can show up as things like brain fog, or confusion, or just muddled thinking. It can also show up as anything that's sort of like anything that is a cyst, or like a deposit of substance somewhere in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, but tell me more, like, how do you spot phlegm?
So I like one is of course in our pulse and tongue.
Hmm.
So that's, besides speaking to our patient, we have those objective, you know, tests that we look at. Like, see, you can see it on the tongue. The tongue is usually puffy, has teeth marks on the side. You might have a slightly thicker coat, and maybe a yellowish or thickish whitish coat. If people tell me that they're getting up in the morning and scraping their tongue, guess what? There's like a phlegm component going on there. And I also find that that whole, like, there's an emotional ability with liver qi stagnation. Like when they tell me that they're alternating between being really tender and really emotional, and like they can't control their emotions, and then feeling angry and frustrated, that to me has become a sign of phlegm and dampness.
Because there is Well, yeah. Why not just a liver fire situation?
Because what I've found is that that oscillating back and forth is actually the dampness obstructing the flow of chi.
Got it. So like an inability to like, if we think about emotions as a movement of energy,
Mm-hmm.
that when that is in fits and starts or inconsistent or just all or nothing, that kind of thing,
Yeah.
that you would think phlegm.
Yeah,
Cool.
and that's just what I have come to like over the years, and especially, I have been a huge fan of Shishangpu and Wangzhe. They're like one of my favorite Duiyao pairs.
Oh, me too. I love those. And for people who might be thinking, are these herbs that could benefit me? Someone with, for example, maybe a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, or it's something where there is an element of like, or there's pain in the body that's worse with particular kinds of weather that can be kind of dampness related, phlegm. It, as well, could be like in the digestive tract. That could be things like gas or bloating, or kind of chronic digestive issues, or chronic skin issues like acne, PCOS, menstrual stuff. So there may be but especially like if you feel like you don't have access to the full functionality of your brain, if you feel like you're looking at the world with bugs on the windshield of your consciousness, then this is an example of where Shirchangpu is kind of, I think about it as like wiping the bugs off the windshield. And Yuanzher has this kidney affinity. The name translates as profound will. So I really love that, and helping us to kind of get rid of the like irrational fears and help us to prioritize what's most important.
And I found with my really driven liver chi stagnated patients, like that's an amazing pair to help repair like the adrenals and to help kind of calm that anxious impulse to always have to be moving and always have to be doing something. It's like the bugs on the windshield are obscuring what they can actually really see, and so they're operating more out of anxiety and worry and that fight or fright, that sympathetic impulse. And if we can clear the bugs, all of a sudden they realize that they weren't in like this disaster zone. They're actually in a really clear, wonderful, sweet place, and they don't have to work so hard.
That seems like almost helping people get more comfortable with their own yin, the aspect
Mm-hmm.
of their being as opposed to their doing. And
Right.
and so maybe like the yin is there all along, like you're saying, but we're not necessarily valuing it.
Right. I have come to feel like that's actually more often the case, and that we actually take we especially American women, I feel like we're really trained to take our yin for granted. And so we dip in it and we use it in a very subconscious sort of way. So that will and that ability to just keep muscling through and to take care of a million different things. Um, I think we often attribute that to yang, and there's a yang part of it, but the ability to do it for as long as we do actually comes from yin, and we don't acknowledge it. It's very subconscious, and that's again coming back to that fog, that not being able to be truly in touch with our very core and our very essence. And we're also uncomfortable with it. Like if you sit for too long, if you're quiet for too long, it's almost a bad thing in our culture.
Oh yeah, sure. It's like so many people consider it lazy or self-indulgent, or they feel guilty for just
Right.
taking a breath in the middle of the day, or just sitting down, for 15 minutes, or getting up from their desk to have lunch, or to take, there's any of these things that are simple ways that we honor the body, that we honor the inner messages that we might be getting, that when we override them, as I'm fond of saying, we're telling ourselves we don't matter.
Right. And I find that those two herbs really help clear and help repair that balance and kind of like get you back in touch with that. And I used to add them to custom formulas all the time. And I love that Andrew's MicroGuard Plus has them in there, because I think that's a really key thing with Americans is that we kind of have this cultural created delusion of fog that we've all agreed is normal. And we need to help clear that away to help get back to ourselves.
Especially when that fog is like profoundly sexist. You know,
Yes.
I mean, like really, like we're in this culture that really values the yang over the yin. And it's like we all, men and women, have both within us. And there's just this fetishization of doing more and achieving more and being that first, best, only, faster, more productive, blah, 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 that totally devalues the how it feels from the inside out. And that sort of like everyone kind of moving at their own pace according to their own truth.
Well, and that analogy I gave of the hamster wheel, and like you're running really fast, but you're going nowhere. Like you can get off the wheel, but if you can't slow down enough to really sink in and realize that you're just running for no reason, you're just going to stay there. And I find that to me is more of where we're at, is that we're not even able to be still enough to realize that we're on the wheel. And so it's not a problem of us running out of gas like yin deficiency. It's more a problem of us not being able to actually see where we are. And so that's why I tend to go more and see more phlegm. And of course, like I said, I get more earth people. If I had, more water or more kidney people, I'd probably see more yin deficient. But that's not who is attracted to my style of practice. So I tend to see earth and fire and wood. So
nice. I see a lot of earth and wood people as well, but I do see a fair amount of yin deficiency of people who kind of are in that classic way, like they have been dipping into their reserves for too long, and they are manifesting with. I mean, especially women going through menopause. It's like that I believe can be a really empowering time if we're willing to look at how can I work with this reorganization of my life force that we call Jing to show up differently in the world in this next phase. And it does involve making sure that there's enough coolant in the engine to keep it from burning out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what else, getting back to those patterns, like the person who walks in with stress and sleep issues, are there any other patterns that you wanted to talk about? Or do you feel like we got it?
I think we got it.
Yeah, I did
At least
too.
in my practice. Yeah. Even with me out here, my menopausal women are all like fire and wood that have we have to just slow them down. And
yes. I think that's true for no matter what constitutional type you are, because we're all still living in the same culture that still prizes this doing everything fast.
Yeah.
And doing it for performance and doing it for how it looks on the outside. And so yeah, I think all women, I hope, and really, like, why limit it to, why gender this conversation? It does, I think the burden of doing less, I think, is harder a lot of times for women, but I think men as well could benefit from boundaries and slowing down.
It's funny because I was talking about this because I have a son and, trying to raise a boy in this day and age in a more mindful and aware and emotionally connected way. And my husband and I were talking about like women are definitely get a short end of a lot of the stick, but there's also like this expectation with men that if you are calm and take care of yourself and are emotionally available, that there's like a laziness component to it, and that you're not doing enough and you're not providing enough and you could be doing more. And on the other hand, if you're like a super type A executive that's out there doing everything, then you get vilified for not being around and always being concerned about money and not being emotionally aware of your family or the people that you love. And so I think both sides of us get, there's just a whole lot in our culture that we need to help.
Absolutely. I'll add to that I've heard from some of my male patients who are struggling with depression because they are kind of in that liver chi stagnation space of feeling like they're just getting through life and it's exhausting day after day, but nothing's particularly satisfying. That I've heard from several of my male clients that it's more culturally accepted to say that you're stressed and anxious than that you are depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just really whether it shows up as anxiety or depression, we might still treat the liver. We might still just kind of get that unstuck and still want to plug somebody into that idea of that to bring them out of that cultural fog.
Right. Yeah. And like you and I were talking before about finding your own true north. I think a lot of that liver chi stagnation is because a lot of us are doing work that has no purpose for us. Mm-hmm. And, I find it with my kids, it's really obvious with kids. Like, kids want to have a purpose and they want to have things to do. And I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. And especially at this age, they really respond amazing if you give them something that's really real, like just emptying the dishwasher at night, like whatever, like that's not a real job. Like, I watched my son this summer. I grew up on a ranch in Wyoming, and I watched my son this summer work with the horses. And there was a level of just maturity and response and just like blossoming that happened that I think everybody wants. Like, everybody needs that purpose. And I think a lot of us, sadly, are living lives that they feel like that's not being fulfilled in 100% of the way. And
I think you're, if I'm hearing you correctly, surely no one would argue that emptying the dishwasher is someone's life purpose, but it gives your kid a sense of purpose, a sense of contributing to other people's well-being.
Well, it's not actually, what I was saying is that it's not as important. Like, chores are important, yes, but like, there's a lot of our culture where we've taken away purpose. Like, paper routes don't exist anymore. Things that we used to do as kids that we used to be able to go off and find purpose in are really not allowed anymore. Instead, it's funneled into after school programs, which could be, but not necessarily. And I just think this whole thing that we're talking about with that liver chi stagnation is just a problem that's like kind of an example of a larger cultural thing where we're kind of trying to figure out what our purpose is. And, whether you're 43 or 13, you're still trying to figure out what your purpose is.
And what do you feel like would be medicine for that?
Oh, I think we help a lot because we clear a lot of those bugs from the windshield. And we also give downtime and quiet time to be able to connect back in with that. I also think a part of our culture that's missing right now that we're all trying to figure out how to rebuild is community.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like we know that for women especially, that having close friends, having a circle of friends is as much of a factor in preventing mortality, right? Or like, how does one say that? It's a risk factor for death to be lonely, right? And so having a well-developed circle of friends and a sense of community is so critical. And a lot of times I feel like, especially with my older patients, that there's a sense of disconnection from feeling useful or feeling or feeling like there's a loneliness and also kind of like a what now. And maybe that's because we don't necessarily have we ghettoize people as they age, but that sense of staying connected to one's vitality is critical for people feeling their best later in life.
Well, and I see it at all ages. I see it in how kids become addicted to social media and but feel isolated and alone. I see it in new mothers who are juggling, trying to handle a new baby and learning how to be a mother, but are trying to find their mother tribe and don't necessarily have a built-in support network and are feeling isolated and lonely at home. I see it with new dads whose lives have just completely changed and there isn't really any support with new fathers. It's just kind of like expected to go, everything is normal. And I think I see it in every phase of the life in our life. I think that's actually for me, one of the things that I try to do in my clinic. And that's one of the main things I feel like we're kind of toe-to-toe with as acupuncturists is that connection and that stress and how all of that feeds each other.
So do you assign your patients go out and cultivate, like upgrade a few acquaintances to friends?
I have.
I do too. I literally will write that down. I'm like, think about the people in your world. Who do you like being around? Who helps you become the person that you want to be? It's one of the reasons that I started bringing people together for self-care support groups or boot camps is because people feel like they're all alone in some of these struggles, and what they need is a circle, is people
Yeah,
to band together with in order to make progress. But a lot of times it's simple. It's like that everyone's living these isolated, atomized lives, and we are missing that warmth of community.
totally. Groups. I often brainstorm with like volunteer places,
Mhm.
like places where they can go and start to build community. Yeah, yeah, I think it's really important.
I'd love to switch gears a little bit and ask you about your herbal work, because I find that really interesting. Like CBD is everywhere, including Bed Bath and Beyond these days. And yet, as medical professionals, we're in sort of a weird space where we can't exactly, as practitioners, it's like this legal gray area. We can't really guide our patients very well, but there is certainly kind of this renaissance of what has been the cannabis plant has been part of the Chinese medicine pharmacopoeia forever. And
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it's been much maligned and demonized and made illegal, but we're starting it's having this comeback. And I would love to hear, since I know that you have been blending hemp into Chinese herbal topicals. I'd love to hear how you kind of got into that. And also just why you think Chinese medicine practitioners are in this unique position to be able to responsibly advise patients about it.
Sure. So I got started in doing this about 4 years ago because I'm in Colorado and cannabis was legalized here in 2012 for general use. My patients have been self medicating for a while. And about 2015 ish or so, I started having enough patients in my patient list that were self medicating that I started noticing reactions when I gave them herbs, because I do a lot of herbs. And when I would prescribe a formula like Xiao San in a typical dosage for a patient, and then they would come back and they would report what are often like negative side effects in Chinese herbs basically mean upset tummy and you can't leave the bathroom for very much. And it's really rare. Like it doesn't happen that often. And they would come back with like, Xiao San and be telling me this. And I'm like looking at them like,
Right.
how?
Like I prescribed this formula 10,000 times. And like, this is not what happens. Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And then after questioning, I would discover that they were using CBD. And it didn't matter whether it was CBD with THC or just straight CBD, that they were experimenting with using CBD. And after, I had lots of patients coming in and me figuring this out, I just started messing with the dosage. So instead of taking them off of, like, say if I was prescribing like a granular formula and doing like 3 grams 3 times a day, so 9 grams a day, I dropped it down by 2/3 just to start off. And I did that literally just because I wanted to get to a place that I thought was safe and then start increasing back up. And what I found, kind of just like a general rule of thumb for me, was that that actually worked. Like, so a 1/3 dose with somebody using CBD actually equated to like a full dose without CBD.
Really interesting. So there was a potentiation going on.
Yeah. And so my dad at the same time, he's this, farmer from Wyoming. And I've always made topicals, and I had a topical that I had made for pain and bruising. And he called me up and he was like, this stuff works great. Lots of farmers tend to not want to use drugs. They don't want to be incapacitated in any shape, way, or form. So he loved using my topical because it took away the pain, but he didn't feel like he was drugged. But it only lasted 2 hours. And so, driving a tractor and trying to put on a topical oil liniment on the back of in the small of your back, it just doesn't work. And so I took what I was learning with my patients with CBD and then kept my dosing the same with my herbs and my topical, but then added in 175 milligrams of CBD and gave it to him. And that was how Good Life Botanicals started. He used it, and he's like, even though he's my dad, he's super skeptical. Sometimes I think it's harder to treat family than it is to treat strangers. And he called me a week later, and at first he didn't think it was working, and then he stopped using it, and he realized that when he was using it, he had no pain and was sleeping better than he had like in 10 years.
Fabulous.
Yeah. And so then I just started using it in my clinic and giving it to patients, and, just started using it and figuring it out. And then about 3 years ago is when we started really pushing it. And Chinese Medicine Networks, another great group, were the first people who really supported us and had us share our product. And then I just started having, now we're in 6 countries around the world. We have over 500 clinics that are using our products. So we have a pretty good feedback now on how it works and what it does. And it potentiates the actions of the other herbs. And it's interesting because when you look back at the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica and you look at the ancient description of what cannabis sativa is, that's what it is. It's a chi booster. It boosts spleen chi. And so it's just, I find myself being more of, I'm a historian by trade, and I find myself being more of a researcher and kind of like bringing back this herb that used to be in the top 30 of all cultures around the world, not just China, but all cultures around the world, and then was kind of like scrubbed out of existence. That's how I view this.
I really appreciate that perspective because that really, when we pan back, this is an herb that has been renowned cross-culturally for a really long time for a ton of different conditions.
Mm-hmm. And this is how it's used. It's interesting. When I was first talking about this and traveling around and going to different seminars and stuff, I met an Ayurvedic doctor, and he was from India. And when I told him what I was doing, he looked at me like, duh. And I was like, duh? No. And he's like, this is how it's used in Ayurvedic medicine all the time. If you know the formula and you know the pattern and you give the formula and the formula is not working, we add a little bit of cannabis to it. And it like boosts the system and helps the body be able to use the herbs that we are giving. And then over a period of time, we drop the cannabis and the formula still works.
So if people are using cannabis recreationally or medically, and I know there are plenty of Chinese herbal practitioners who listen to the show, would you recommend that's A, an important part of our intake, and B, to consider dropping the dosage of all of our Chinese formulas?
I think it's definitely an important part of your intake. Mm-hmm. And it's something that you need to see because, like everything else within our medicine, it wasn't every patient of mine that took cannabis that had a reaction. Mm-hmm. But it was like a large enough percentage of them that I started to notice a pattern. And you need to know when you are working, because otherwise your patients are going to be coming in and you're going to be like, how is this happening? Like, what's happening? Right.
Well, just curious, getting back to mechanisms of action for a second, like that. Mm-hmm. So if cannabis is classified as a chi tonic historically, how would you explain its pain relieving action?
So,
because we typically don't think about things that help the gut or boost the spleen chi. Essentially, we're thinking about the digestive system. That it's not an obvious leap to why that would be good for treating pain, for example.
Correct. Until you understand how the endocannabinoid system works and where it touches. And then it's not a direct one-to-one. So like THC is a sedative. And so if you're using a CBD that has THC, that's where your pain relieving properties are coming from, is from the THC or the THCA, which you're going to get me to start geeking out on cannabinoids, and I'm probably going to we could go there forever. But THC and THCA are actually the two main things that deal with pain. And CBD does pain somewhat, but not necessarily, which is why so many people who are using it for pain right now are having such different feedback about it, right? Like you'll hear that CBD is really good for seizures, and it can be good anxiety and for nervousness, but there's really mixed bag reports on pain.
So for pain relief, the THC is really an important part of the equation.
Yeah, THC and THCA. And the difference between the two is THC is what can make you hallucinate and get you high and converts directly into anandamide, whereas THCA is the precursor to THC. And research is finding that what it does is actually calm inflammation and reduce pain, but it does not get you high.
All right.
And so what and how I use CBD is as that chi booster. I have to use it with the other herbs. So like I use it with mo yao and ruxiang, so frankincense and myrrh.
Such a classic pairing that in Chinese medicine will be invigorating, moving to the qi and blood in the channels. And so if we do have pain anywhere, if we think about that as like the log jam in the river that we want to we want to restore the free flow to, that these are herbs that are going to be classic for traumatic injuries or for just pain in the channels, getting the qi and blood moving.
Right. And that's why I feel really strongly, like I think how it's being used now is curious and interesting, but it's not how it was used traditionally when it was in the materia medicas across cultures. It was always combined with something else. And that's because of that chi boosting technique. And so what it's doing is it's boosting the actions of the other herbs that it's paired with.
That really feels like is such a, if herbs have different personalities and different attributes, it really seems like that, like, would it be a fair statement that cannabis it's a really good helper? It's a really good assistant. Like when we think about Chinese herbal formulas, we often think about there being a chief herb or, the main herb that is directing the action and that is paired with an assistant or something that's going to help it out. And so like, would you say that could be the appropriate role is not the chiefer, but the assistant?
Yes. The way I describe it is that, like, when you're building a Chinese formula, you're building a superstar band, like, a super group.
Yes. I love that.
And you have these different pairings, like we talked about, like, Shichangpu and Wangzhe are one pairing, and frankincense and myrrh are another pairing, and Honghua and Sanglang are another, Ten Tao Ren are another group that work well together. And you pull in. It's just like you're building, like you're pulling in like the bass player and your lead guitar player and your backup singers. And if you really want to go super group, you'll have like a brass part, and you'll have like your drums, and you might have like two bass players, and you might have two electric guitars, you might have three trumpets and like two sets of backup singers. And they're all doing different things, but also really creating this rich and robust sound. And hemp is like the hit player that comes in, the pitch-in player that can come in and do any one of those things and make everybody sound even better than they did by themselves.
Oh, I love that. That's what a fun analogy. And that idea that there are these pairs that might have played together in the past, like they might have had a previous band together. So like they already, they know each other. And then we put them in a group and they're able to know, everybody knows what their job is. And we might have like another, there might be a manager of the band that tells like this whole formula to go to the spleen or the lungs or the large intestine or wherever we want. And that's the guide. Super cool. I love that analogy. I'll be using that.
Yeah.
One last question about CBD, that we know that acupuncture itself works on the endocannabinoid system, right? This idea that we've evolved with cannabis so much that we have receptors for it in our bodies, and and we have our own cannabinoid-like chemicals that we can be produced and zipped around. So can you add to our conception of like that acupuncture itself and the role that it might play in endocannabinoids internally?
Sure. So, from the research and how the understanding that I'm developing, so the endocannabinoid system to me is really becoming how I see it and view it as kind of like the master switch that runs everything. It connects directly to the brain, and it follows along a lot of the vagus nerve and touches every major organ system, the bones, the gut. I really think of it as being like the master system that's regulating and maintaining homeostasis. And that's what its job is to regulate and maintain all of that. And so when acupuncture is interacting with it, that's what it's doing, is it's allowing, I tend to think of us as Americans is like the endocannabinoid system is always on the verge of being, it's like on this range of being frayed. Like how frayed is our endocannabinoid system? Is it just slightly fried? Is it just slightly like fraying like a cloth that's has just a few threads poking out? Or have through stress and emotional stuff and life, have we just got that system to the point where it's really frayed? And I think that's what acupuncture does, is it helps that system calm down and it helps it reset so it can start to heal itself. And I think that's what we've all been doing as acupuncturists, is on a very basic level. Like that's not all that we do, but I think every time we stick a needle into a person and they go into that deep parasympathetic state, that's what we're doing, is we're helping that endocannabinoid system to repair itself. And when you use hemp, and that's why I think our culture right now, it's one of the theories I have, but why our culture right now is so enamored with cannabis is that we fry our endocannabinoid system all the time. And using cannabis is the fastest, most efficient way to heal that, but it can't do it as efficiently by itself as it can with its other members of its band. And that's why I think acupuncturists and Chinese medicine doctors are really primed, because we know, especially herbalists, know how to work with the herbs and how the herbs work and how to mitigate side effects. And once you understand that cannabis is a chi booster, you don't need a whole lot of it. You really don't. And more isn't always better, which is also a tenet of Chinese herbalism. And so I think that's how they work together. And I think if you're able to do acupuncture and use herbs with a little bit of hemp or cannabis, you really are setting up this environment right now where a lot of our patients need it, because that's what they need to really heal that system.
I would love to just continue chatting all day with you about the ins and outs of endocannabinoids, but I do want to respect your time, and I really appreciate what we have been able to cover so far. And I think that I'm hoping that people will get some real actionable tips about really, I mean, just actually to bring it back to the fog of phlegm that may be blocking our own access to what might be a perfectly healthy endocannabinoid system, or really anything else, is that being able to, in Chinese medicine, the heart has the capability of vaporizing phlegm. Right. So a practitioner might drain dampness through urination or through having, transforming phlegm to have it be coughed out or pooped out or, like sweated out, all these different ways that we have of getting something out of the body. But the heart, which contains the consciousness, has the ability to just see through it. And so I'm hoping that if whoever is out there listening, feeling like they might just need to a reset for themselves, that really that a lot of that is just coming back to what is found within. And so go get some acupuncture, get yourself plugged into your own endocannabinoid system so that you can feel what it's like to get that reset.
Yeah.
Stacey Donelson, thank you again for being such an amazing guest here today on A Healthy Curiosity. And if people want to connect with you, where would you suggest they go?
I'm easiest found on Facebook. You can like my page, Good Life Botanicals. And they can also send me an email at Stacey, Stacey, at goodlifebotanicals.com. And I'm at the moment still fairly responsive to all of that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here today. I've really appreciated our conversation.
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.